National Cabinet sees all states bar Western Australia agree on a plan to open borders by December.
We've come together, all as the adults in the room on this, to ensure that we're going forward and doing the best thing we believe is in the interests of the country.
Victoria's death toll soars, but there are signs the COVID-19 infection rate is slowing. An inner Sydney street is swarmed by the riot squad after a man was fatally shot. Another is seriously injured. A man found floating in the sea off Japan after a live export ship capsized, declared dead by authorities. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Kirsten Aiken. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says all states and territories, with the exception of Western Australia, are working on a plan to open up Australia's internal borders by Christmas. National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett has more from Parliament House.
They're going to sit out any further discussion about border restrictions. So we'll set them to one side. That leaves 7 of 8 governments who have agreed on something. What have they agreed to? They've agreed to keep working towards a plan for possible reopening of their borders and free movement, possibly by Christmas. Now, the steps and thresholds that'll have to be cleared in order to make that happen and to include all 7 states, well, they haven't been specified at all. Particularly difficult when you look at the state of Victoria. It's got a long way to go in a very short time. I'm not sure anyone's realistically expecting Victoria, despite its good intentions, to be reopened by Christmas in the way that other states just might. So it was slow and methodical. It was very process-driven. More than anything else, though, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, was very keen to accommodate disagreement within this body called National Cabinet, not to demand, as the old COAG Assembly used to, consensus or agreement on every single issue. So he started at the outset today to redefine the ground rules for the way that National Cabinet works so that some states can begin, some states can move faster than others, but seeking movement nevertheless.
Not everyone has to get on the bus for the bus to leave the station, but it is important the bus leaves the station, and we all agree on that.
So movement he wants towards an end, he understands, to be the reopening of state borders. But when that happens is very difficult to predict. Again, here is Scott Morrison's aspiration for how that might work, although we're only talking about plans to get us there at the moment, remembering there are no firm dates here.
7 out of 8 states and territories has agreed with that ambition for Christmas. And I'm not going to hold Australia back when 1 or 2 jurisdictions at this point in time, because of their own circumstances, don't wish to go along with the path that the country's seeking to go in. I think that's just common sense, Mark. I think that's just practical. I think that's what people would expect of me.
Now, there's also been a lot of talk about a national definition for a COVID-19 hotspot. What progress was made on that issue today?
Again, that's another ingredient to get to where Scott Morrison just said he hopes the nation can be, Kirsten, by the end of the year. So what they would like to have is a definition so that rather than locking down a whole state, if you had a certain number of infections locally acquired in a particular area, you could shut that down without shutting down an entire city, as we've seen in Melbourne, or an entire state. Problem is the Commonwealth has a definition here that it put to the states and territories. No one has actually locked on to that. I won't try and describe it in detail, but one proposal is that for your large metropolitan areas, the cities, you would lock it down after 30 locally acquired cases on average over each of 3 days. That would be grounds. No one's agreed to that. Each has agreed to go away and look at the concept of definitions, though, and that is again a body of work that'll have to be developed between now and either the next National Cabinet or more likely Christmas itself.
Staying with WA's refusal to open its border by December, reporter Ben Gabana joins me now from Perth. Ben, WA was the only state not to agree to the national plan to reopen borders. Has the Premier outlined an alternative?
Well, it was a defiant Mark McGowan we saw this afternoon in his press conference, outlining that really Western Australia will go it alone. It's really a wait-and-see approach, but he wasn't signing up, as you say, to what the other states and territories were doing, really that we will go our own way and open the border when our health advice says that it's right to do so. He said that the discussions in National Cabinet were productive, but also that WA has shied away previously from putting a date or an arbitrary date on when borders would reopen, purely because coronavirus isn't predictable, and we've seen other states have to shift their policies, and he says that that causes massive disruption. He also defended the decision to reject the hotspot idea, and he argued that it wasn't as effective at keeping coronavirus out as the hard border has been. He mentioned as well that bringing into a federal court ruling, which is in play with Clive Palmer currently suing Western Australia over its hard border. He said that the federal court ruled that the hard border was the most effective at keeping the virus out. So he's really played into that and said it's a wait-and-see game at the moment.
Now, the Premier says WA is vastly different to the other states, and that's something the Commonwealth understands. What exactly is that based on?
Yeah, well, it was quite interesting. The Premier outlined a whole raft of economic and geographical arguments. He mentioned that WA doesn't have the same border communities as many of the eastern states do. He also mentioned that WA's economy was the only one that grew in recent months, up 1.1%. He says that the housing and construction sector was, quote, going gangbusters. He also mentioned that retail spending, figures came out today on that, and it was the best result on record, totalling $3.4 billion in July. So he's really trying to outline the fact that Western Australia is onto a good thing at the moment. And he also brought into play the fact that the national economy, he says, relies on Western Australia so heavily. He said that it would be dire if the virus came back into Western Australia, particularly focusing on the mining industry. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
It'd be catastrophic for the rest of the country and for Western Australia. They rely on us. You know, where do they think their money comes from? Where do they think, in some places, all the money comes for services and hospitals and schools and police forces and public servants? It comes out of Western Australia.
And so is there any idea when the border will reopen?
There's really not at this stage. Sentiment, though, publicly here in Western Australia is very much in support of the border. We've seen a poll yesterday in Western Australia's daily paper that support is about 90%. The Premier was also keen to point out that WA has had 146 days of no community transmission and 7 days of zero new cases, saying that if the border were to reopen, he'd need to see at least 28 days of no community transmission in other states. Now, this afternoon we have seen the Chamber of Commerce and Industry here in WA say that they're incredibly disappointed by today's announcement, that they would like to see a staged reopening and that we can't rely on a vaccine to come out. So it does look like pressure is mounting, particularly in the lead up to Christmas, but certainly it looks like the border will be in place for some time to come. Ben
Gabana reporting live for us this afternoon from Perth. While Tasmania's Premier reiterated his intention to reopen the state's borders by Christmas, he says the state will only be guided by public health advice and not pressure from the federal government.
With the death toll from coronavirus continuing to grow in Victoria and case numbers continuing, our absolute priority here remains the health, safety and wellbeing of Tasmanians. We have no active cases in our state and test numbers continue to be strong now, with more than 90,000 Tasmanians having had a test so far. I know these are challenging times and that there continues to be pressure to open our borders sooner. However, I want to again reiterate why we have earmarked 1 December as a border reopening date, and to make it perfectly clear that, of course, if the situation in Victoria or elsewhere in terms of the flow on cases that we're seeing in other jurisdictions come under control sooner, then obviously, as I've said, we will take public health advice in terms of our borders. But I want to make the point very clearly. If circumstances change for the worse, then we will obviously act on public health advice. That's just common sense.
The New South Wales Premier is urging Queensland to consider softening its border agreements to let workers through. Premier Gladys Berejiklian says it would significantly help the agriculture, tourism and hospitality industries.
I would like to see Queensland join those conversations as well. To date, the Queensland Premier has said she will think about it, but I think it's really critical for the Eastern Seaboard. You know, we're inextricably linked, the three states in particular. I would like to see the Queensland Premier join those conversations as well. In fact, in addition to ag workers, I'm especially concerned about construction jobs, infrastructure jobs between the Queensland-New South Wales border, in addition to tourism jobs, obviously. So I do hope she will choose to join the conversations that Victoria, South Australia, the Commonwealth and myself and my state will be having. And of course, when it comes to ag workers, again, I'm looking for resolution imminently. Our health experts have given us very encouraging preliminary advice in that regard. And as the Victorian numbers continue to decline, that gives us a greater degree of comfort on moving forward in a confident way. In relation to, New South Wales-Queensland borders, I urge the Queensland Premier to consider carefully the impact that the borders are having on our communities, on our citizens on either side. And when I think about the impact on people, I don't necessarily think about them on either side of the border. In fact, some of the concerns that I learned when I went down to Albury were for people on the Victorian side. I think really during a pandemic you have to look at this issue from a compassionate perspective, a human perspective, and appreciate that people with medical challenges, with compassionate reasons, or just to get to work, need to be considered. And I urge the Queensland Premier to consider all of those issues moving forward, especially given where New South Wales is in the pandemic and what we've demonstrated.
Victoria has recorded 81 new cases of coronavirus overnight and a further 59 deaths. 6 fatalities were recorded yesterday. The remainder date back until July due to changes in the way aged care facilities report coronavirus deaths. A roadmap out of the state's restrictions will be announced on Sunday. The Premier, Daniel Andrews, says the lower number of new infections is promising, but it's important to ease out of restrictions in a safe manner.
I fully appreciate and understand the pain and the challenge that those businesses are facing. What I would say is this is not a choice. This is not something that we are choosing to do. There is simply no alternative but to ease out of these restrictions in a safe and steady way. And I know we all want this to be over. We all want the same thing. But the notion of opening up quickly, the notion of opening up in that way is not a responsible thing to do. It is not a safe thing to do, and it will not be a lasting thing that we do. It will be 5 minutes of sunshine and we will be back into these sorts of restrictions again.
And we'll have special coverage of the Victorian Government's roadmap out of lockdown announcement this Sunday from 8 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time before Insiders here on the ABC News Channel. A major police operation involving the riot squad is underway in Sydney's inner west after a man was shot and killed this afternoon. Our reporter Rani Hayman is in Lewisham and joins me now. Rani, can you tell us more about just what took place there earlier?
So earlier this afternoon, emergency services were called here to Henry Street at Lewisham after there were reports that a man was stabbed. He subsequently died and was given CPR by people here before that had happened. We then heard from police later on in the afternoon who said that they were looking for, possibly looking for suspects. They said that the current situation was unknown, but then we heard that the man had actually been shot. So now, as you can see behind me, it looks like paramedics are actually taking what we've heard is a second man. Police have confirmed that earlier. A second man was also shot here at this street in Lewisham. So it looks like paramedics are taking someone, could possibly be that man, into an ambulance right now. There really is a large presence of paramedics and police here today. We did see the police riot squad here earlier today. They had police dogs. They had a number of riot squad members here with their guns drawn as they were trying to figure out exactly what was going on here on Henry Street. There was a woman who was taken away by police earlier today. We heard that she was a witness to what may have occurred here, but they have said that at this stage she is not a suspect. But as I said, as you can see behind me, it looks like someone is being taken away in this ambulance as we speak.
Rani, you mentioned the very large presence by authorities there on the scene. What about neighbours and other witnesses? Have you been able to talk to anyone who saw what happened this afternoon?
So surrounding us right now, there's a number of people who actually live on this street and the other street, which is Victoria Street, which has also been blocked off and has been blocked off for several hours now. So there are a number of residents who have been standing here for hours trying to figure out how they're going to get inside their homes. I spoke to a couple of them earlier. Here's what they had to say.
Bit of a shock, but you know, these things don't happen every day, do they?
It's like nothing like that's ever happened like this.
So at the moment, we haven't heard from police as to what the motivation may have been behind this attack, but it looks like there are a number of things still going on behind me. As I've said, there is a large police presence here. There is a large presence of paramedics here. So I expect that will continue throughout the afternoon as police try and figure out what exactly has gone down.
Annie Heyman keeping us updated with developments there on the streets of Lewisham in inner Western Sydney. To some breaking news this hour, and the AFL has suspended Richmond players Sydney Stack and Callum Coleman-Jones for 10 matches each and sent them home from Queensland for breaching the league's COVID protocols. The ABC's national sport reporter David Mark joins me now. David, just take us through what the AFL has had to say following the events overnight.
The AFL sent out a media release just a few moments ago, Kirsten, and this follows the news that the two players that you mentioned, Sydney Stack and Callum Coleman-Jones, were arrested by Queensland police at 3:30 this morning. They were outside a strip club, a nightclub in Queensland. They were involved in an altercation. It is absolutely unimaginable that this could happen after so many players previously had already been fined and suspended for similar breaches. The entire AFL community, all the players, all the coaches and officials knew that they weren't allowed out of their hubs. This is only a couple of days after Queensland has been awarded the AFL Grand Final, so it comes at the worst possible time. As you said, each player will be suspended for 10 matches, which is at least 6 more than any other player has been suspended so far this year, and they've been sent home immediately. And the AFL has come out and said, put simply, there's no excuse for the breach. The players knew the rules, and indeed they did, and they chose to ignore them.
So a significant penalty for each of the players involved, but what does this mean for the club, Richmond?
So Richmond was in a position where the wife of the captain, Trent Cotchin, so Brooke Cotchin, Trent Cotchin's wife, had previously breached the protocols by visiting a day spa a few months ago. The club was fined $45,000, of which $25,000 was suspended. The Cotchins chose to pay that $20,000 fine themselves, but the remaining $25,000 was held over. They've now been hit with that $25,000 fine, as well as another $75,000 for this particular breach, so $100,000 altogether. That will be included in their soft cap, which covers sort of coaching and costs and things like that. That will be included in their cap for next year. In other words, that's $100,000 less that they're able to spend, as well as being hit with that fine. So it's significant, but from a reputational point of view, you'll remember Richmond are the defending grand finalists. They've won 2 of the past 3 grand finals. They're one of the glamour clubs in the competition and going particularly well this season. For Richmond to be involved in this sort of breach yet again does a huge amount of damage to the club and its reputation.
And you mentioned, of course, that it's only days since Queensland was given the hosting rights for the AFL Grand Final. More generally, what does this mean in terms of damaging the league and its reputation?
The league has done everything it possibly can to put procedures in place to make sure this sort of thing doesn't happen, and yet it's happened time and time and time again. And just 2 days after the announcement, it is, as I said earlier, it's the worst possible news. And it also sort of comes at a time where there is a debate about the fact that AFL families, like the Chief Executive Gillan McLachlan and others, have all moved up to Queensland hubs with their families, with their children and partners and so on. And so that puts them in a very different situation to a lot of people in Melbourne who haven't been able to leave the city and so on. So questions are being asked about that. There is a lot of pressure on the AFL. They can't afford any stuff-ups, and this is one of the worst ones that's happened.
David Mark, thank you. Former federal judge says the NDIS Commission needs to act earlier to identify people who may be at risk of harm or neglect. The scheme has been given 10 recommendations in response to the death of Adelaide woman Anne-Marie Smith, who died from septic shock, severe pressure sores and malnourishment. The recommendations include that no vulnerable NDIS participant should have a sole carer providing services in their homes. It's also been suggested the formation of a community visitor scheme to monitor vulnerable Australians with disabilities. The NDIS Commission says the review hasn't found any significant failings in its response to Ms Smith's death. Her former carer has been charged with manslaughter. ABC election analyst Anthony Green has called the final 4 seats in the Northern Territory election 15 days after election night. Small voting margins under 20 votes have separated the winners, with the Country Liberal Party taking the bush seats of Barkly and Namatjira. Labor has won the suburban seat of Blaine, while fledgling party Territory Alliance has taken Arullian. The figures mean Labor holds 14 seats to the Country Liberal Party's 8. Formal distribution is still needed to confirm the results. A man has died after being pulled unconscious from the ocean off Japan following the suspected capsizing of a live export ship. Authorities are still searching for survivors. 41 people remain missing, including 2 Australians. Our North Asia correspondent Jake Sturmer joins me now. Jake, what do we know about the person who was indeed found earlier?
Kirsten, what really is the grim news that no one was wanting to hear. The discovery of this man who was pulled unconscious and floating face down in the water around 6:30 this morning in the search area where the ship, the Gulf Livestock One, is believed to have sunk. Now, they took him back to hospital. However, he was pronounced dead around 11:30 this morning. He is one of 43 crew members who were on that ship, the Gulf Livestock One, and the search continues for 41 of them. The authorities have been able to find 1 person alive. That was on Wednesday evening, a Filipino man. But the remaining 41 are still being searched for, and it is quite a large-scale search operation from Japan's Coast Guard and also the Maritime Self-Defence Force. And the hope is that there will be some good news coming soon. But as every hour passes, the chance of that starts to lessen and diminish.
What information is there about why the ship appears to have capsized?
Authorities believe that an engine on the ship cut out. This is based on the information they've been able to gather from the Filipino man, the chief officer who was on that ship. He told Japan's Coast Guard that a strong wave hit the ship after an engine failed, and that triggered the ship. It pushed it to capsize, and it then sunk. The Filipino man put on a life jacket. He jumped into the water, and that was the last that he saw of his colleagues, his fellow crew members. Now, in terms of what authorities have been able to find from their searching so far, and it has been going on since Wednesday, and we're now late into Friday, authorities have found the 1 Filipino man alive, the 1 person who has been pronounced dead. We do not know his nationality at this stage. Authorities are still trying to work that out. They've also found dozens of dead sheep. Of course, there were 5,800 head of cattle on this ship, and they've been able to find dozens of those dead cattle. And they've also found a life jacket with the name of the ship, Gulf Livestock One, on it.
Now, there are 2 Australians missing. One is Lucas Order, who is a vet on board. His family and friends are obviously very distressed right now.
Indeed, it's very hard to imagine what they must be going through and what all the families must be going through as they wait to find out any information about what is happening in that search. Lucas's father put out a statement this afternoon. He was very thankful, extraordinarily grateful for all of the search and rescue crews involved in this operation, and he remains hopeful that the search will have an optimistic outcome. We've also heard from some family and friends this afternoon and today. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
It's another tragedy for a family and all the families really involved, but also it's another tragedy for our nation to lose a young person who has so much promise and so much goodness.
And it really is a race right now, Kirsten, because there is another very powerful typhoon to the south of Japan that is due to hit the search area in the coming days. Now, authorities are having to weigh up some very difficult decisions about just how long they can continue this search for as that powerful typhoon approaches.
OK, Jake Sturmer reporting live from Tokyo. A rogue Afghan soldier who murdered 3 Australians he was serving alongside is poised to be transferred to Qatar ahead of US-brokered peace talks involving the Taliban. The army sergeant known as Hekmatullah killed Stefan Milosevic, Robert Poati and James Martin near Tarin Count in 2012. Over recent days, the Afghan government has freed all but a handful of prisoners, as demanded by the Taliban, before peace talks can begin. Hekmatullah is believed to be among a small group who remain in custody because of pressure from Western governments. The ABC has been told Prime Minister Scott Morrison again discussed the case this week with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. A rescue operation has resumed this morning in Beirut for a possible survivor of last month's blast. Signs of life have been detected in the rubble of a building 1 month after the explosion devastated the city. Specialist sensors have detected signs of breathing and a weak heartbeat. Rescue attempts were suspended yesterday because of safety concerns, but they are back underway. It's almost 10:30 there in Beirut. We'll bring you developments as we get them. New Zealand has reported its first death from COVID-19 since May. Health authorities say a man in his 50s died in an Auckland hospital. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said New Zealand would keep its current coronavirus restrictions until at least mid-September. New Zealand has reported more than 1,700 cases and 23 deaths since the pandemic began.
Lockdown must always be our last resort. We do not want Auckland or indeed the rest of the country pinging in and out of level 3. Staying on track to lift restrictions with confidence does mean taking a cautious approach now. That is what we have done consistently in our elimination strategy, and it's one Cabinet has decided to continue. That is why today Cabinet decided to retain the current settings, with the next review to take place on Monday the 14th of September. If at that time a change in alert levels is made, it will be time to take effect from 11:59 on Wednesday the 16th of September.
Back home, and homeschooling during the pandemic has led to a surge in demand for tutors, with many parents reporting significant gaps in their children's learning. A Queensland mother says she found her daughter help after watching her struggle to do basic schoolwork remotely. Amy Sheehan has more from the Sunshine Coast.
Irene Pullen was excited about homeschooling her 6-year-old daughter Grace when learning went online earlier this year.
That's the same as your letter, for G for Grace.
But soon daily tasks became a battle.
It wasn't fun for Grace and it wasn't fun for me.
Grace lacked the skills and confidence to do her grade 1 work remotely. The Sunshine Coast mother approached a tutor for help, fearing Grace would fall further behind.
It's incredible how much she's improved. She is where she needs to be in terms of the content, and she is extremely happy.
Many tutoring services say they've doubled the number of children on their books in recent months as parents, forced to become home teachers, realised how far behind their children were with learning.
I think as parents realised they couldn't cope, they tried to find another route.
I find that they are lacking in basic computation skills, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, lacking in that severely.
Former teacher Louise Price says the national school curriculum is putting too much pressure on students to learn concepts quickly.
A teacher has a certain amount of time to cover a concept or a addition or subtraction, and they have a certain amount of time to do it. And if the child doesn't pick it up in that week or 2 weeks, then they get left behind.
A review of the Prep to Year 10 national curriculum was announced in June, with a view to declutter the system. The Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority says the first proposed changes will be put forward in January.
There's no doubt that the better teachers are able to deal with the content of the curriculum, the more successful students will be.
To ensure no more young learners are left behind. Amy Sheehan, ABC News, Sunshine Coast.
Taking a look at tomorrow's weather in the capital cities now. Brisbane, mostly sunny. Clear skies for Sydney. Light cloud across Canberra and Hobart. Melbourne will see showers clearing. A chance of rain in Adelaide, mostly fine for Perth. And sunny in Darwin with a top of 35. You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on iView. Here are the top stories on ABC News. All but one state has agreed to aim to reopen their borders by December during today's National Cabinet meeting. The Prime Minister says Western Australia is the final holdout on the three-stage plan for easing rules and restrictions. Leaders have also agreed to a shift in how National Cabinet operates, moving from absolute consensus to majority rules. Victoria has reported 81 new cases of coronavirus since yesterday and 59 COVID-19 fatalities. 53 of those deaths date back to July and have been added due to changes in reporting requirements for aged care homes. The Premier Daniel Andrews will outline the state's roadmap out of lockdown on Sunday. One man has been shot dead, another has been injured, and there is a huge police presence around a house in Sydney's inner west this afternoon. Emergency services were called to the area about 1 p.m. and found a man with serious injuries. He died while being taken to hospital. Police have also confirmed a second man was found with a gunshot wound on a nearby street in Lewisham. And the AFL has suspended Richmond players Sydney Stack and Callum Coleman-Jones for 10 matches each and sent them home from Queensland for breaching the league's COVID protocols. The pair were arrested by police early this morning after visiting a Gold Coast strip club and getting into a fight. Richmond has been fined $100,000, which includes $25,000 from a previous breach. National Cabinet will consider ways to lift the cap on international arrivals by sending flights to cities other than Sydney and Melbourne. It comes amid concerns tens of thousands of Australians are being left stranded overseas due to the restrictions. The Prime Minister says most flights are still only going to Sydney, so it would require airlines agreeing to fly to other capitals.
On international arrivals, it was agreed that we needed to further boost the capacity for inbound arrivals into Australia, particularly for those Australians seeking to come home. We noted that New South Wales has been doing all the heavy lifting on this, and they really are at their capacity for the time being. And so, as I discussed with Cabinet during the course of this week, the Transport Minister will be working with others to see if we can get flights that currently all seek to come to Sydney, to see if we're in a position to try and get them to going into other ports, whether that be in Perth, in Adelaide, in Darwin, the ACT, or elsewhere, even Tasmania. Premier Gutman was keen to be part of this if that's possible. We want to get more Australians home, and we need to do that safely as well and not compromise the quarantine arrangements we have here as well. Almost 4,000 Australians are coming home every week, but we know there are many more who are trying to get home, and further support has been provided to DFAT to assist those Australians, particularly in hardship overseas.
Freya Werat and her partner have been trying desperately to get back home to Australia from the UK after they missed the government's call to those travelling abroad to come home because she was suffering with coronavirus symptoms. Freya Werat joins me now from Belford in England. Good morning to you, Freya. Thanks so much for joining us. When the pandemic began, can you just explain where you and your partner were at and whether there were any immediate consequences for you as a result of coronavirus?
Yeah, so in March, my partner and I took a quick weekend trip to Spain, and we came back and I had a bit of a cough, and so I tried to get tested. Unfortunately, at the time, the UK didn't have enough testing, so they didn't count Spain as a hotspot compared to Italy. So I wasn't able to get tested, so I don't know 100% for sure that I didn't have COVID-19, but within a few weeks I was then experiencing symptoms to the point where I really couldn't breathe, and I had to call the ambulance, and I was quite scared actually, and my family were also quite scared, and they felt, obviously very impotent, not being able to do anything. And at the same time, I couldn't give up work at the time because I work for an NHS charity trust with Cambridge University Hospitals at Annabrookes. And we were raising funds that were just critical for the care of patients, and also research for around the world. So I really didn't feel like I was in a position to leave at that time until I was able to deliver that project at work. That meant that we were actually able to raise those funds and get things like iPads so that people on ventilators could say goodbye to their family.
And so after that, and I do hope that your health has improved since.
Yeah.
And so after that, did you attempt to make it back to Australia?
Yeah, as soon as things settled down a bit, we tried to book the first flight back to Brisbane, because at the time there weren't any flights back to Brisbane. We booked one for the 3rd of August, that got cancelled and moved to the 2nd of August. Then that got cancelled again when the caps were introduced. And there was the 12th of August. By that time, we'd given up the lease on our house and I'd quit my job. So I had to kind of have this in-between period. I thought, that's fine, I can stay at a friend's place. And then 2 days before our flight, when we were basically homeless and unemployed and couch surfing, we got bumped off that flight from Emirates as well. And then we tried to book something on Singapore Airlines in a couple of weeks' time, but we got bumped off. Well, I think Singapore just said they're not flying at all anymore to Australia. So now the next hope is trying to get on the flight in November after the next caps are lifted.
What kind of toll is this taking on you?
More than anything, it's just the mental health and missing my family. And it just so happened, one of the reasons I want to get back was, in case something happened to a family member while we were gone, and we would have a 2-week lag, optimistically a 2-week lag to get back. And then as it happened, the day after our flights were originally due to leave, I got news that my grandfather was in hospital with pneumonia, and he's recovering now. But that was really tough to go through that and to not know if I'd see him again, potentially.
The government today, no, there's no need to apologise. The government today, Scott Morrison, after today's National Cabinet meeting, said that he does want to talk to other states and territories aside from New South Wales to see if they will accept more overseas stranded Aussies into those states and territories. Of course, there have been no definitive decisions made yet, but that must be news that would be welcome to you.
Nothing would make me happier.
And in the meantime, Marise Payne, the Foreign Affairs Minister, earlier this week announced that there has been an extra provision made for people in your position to provide extra help with temporary loans for things like rent and airline tickets home. Is that something that you might make support of, or might make use of, rather?
To be honest, I suspect that we have too many savings that, we've been saving up for mortgage, for instance, that we wouldn't probably qualify for those loans. And also, it's not like we can afford the tickets home, we just can't get on the flights. That's the problem. So and also, I don't have any rent to pay at the moment since I don't have a house to live in officially.
Are you working at the moment?
Yeah, my work was able to put me back on a temporary contract. And that's week by week, so it's insecure, but I'm really grateful for that.
It's very clear that it is a really tough situation for you and your partner, Freya. We do hope you get some good news soon in terms of a flight, and hope you don't have to wait until November. Thank you for talking to us about your individual situation.
Thank you.
A rescue operation has resumed today in Beirut for a possible survivor of last month's blast. Middle East correspondent Eric Torchek joins me now from Jerusalem. Eric, it's just a little after 10:30 in Beirut. What are the chances that someone has indeed survived until now, 1 month after that enormous blast?
Well, yes, Kirsten, it seems unbelievable, but we were speaking to the Chilean volunteers who detected 2 bodies under the rubble of that building last night, and they said that it's not unheard of, that they have direct experience of rescuing people from earthquake zones after 3 to 4 weeks. So they believe, based on the equipment that they've used, that there is someone alive in there, just very faintly alive. They have a heart rate of about 18 beats per minute, so they suspect they may be in a coma. They also said that the person appears very small, might be a child. And this is after one of their dogs, a specially trained dog, a border collie, found 2 bodies under the rubble, so indicated that there were people trapped in there, and then they used their equipment to find evidence that one of them seemed to be still alive. So since that occurred early yesterday morning, local time, there's been an amazing effort to try and clear the rubble of this very unstable site to get to those people.
Eric, is there any idea just within what time frame the rescuers might reach this person?
It was extraordinary last night. They were trying, there was just a huge team of the Chilean volunteers and local, what they call civil defence units, so people who, work on emergencies, trying with their hands to clear the debris. And then at around 11 p.m. local time, a wall looked like it was going to collapse. So the military, which is supervising recovery operations in Beirut, pulled everyone off the site and said, you're going to need a crane. And in fact said, it's too late. Everyone has to go home until the morning. Now, the Chilean team was not happy with that. They asked if they could keep working, and a large crowd that had gathered of residents and spectators were furious. After 30 days in a city that's been absolutely shattered after a political and financial crisis that's dogged Lebanon for almost a year, people could not believe that the government was saying, let's give up overnight and just come back when it's light. They wanted officials to move heaven and earth, even on the small chance that they might rescue someone alive. So they pushed, and for 2 hours, they were very, very angry. People went onto the site, tried to provoke the soldiers. Activists called for a crane themselves. And at about 1 o'clock, the army relented and let the rescue efforts continue. And a crane arrived about 4 in the morning. And now we're told that rescuers are just centimetres away from reaching those people underneath that rubble.
Eric, if this rescue is pulled off, finally there would be cause for celebration in Beirut.
That's right. I mean, it would be. People are saying to us that it would be a miracle, and that Beirut desperately needs a miracle. Look, officials aren't giving the person much chance of surviving. They really think it would be extremely difficult to survive in the heat of a Lebanon summer. It's only rained once in that time, so there's a question of how they were able to access water. But the Chilean rescuers said that they're very confident in the sensors, in the instruments that they use, that this is a person and that the person is alive. So it would be extraordinary, and it would bring a lot of hope to people in Lebanon and Beirut who have not had any good news in a very long time.
Now, Eric, it's understood that more ammonium nitrate has been found near the port. What details do you have?
Well, Kirsten, only that yesterday Lebanon's military put out a short statement saying that they'd found just over 4 tonnes of ammonium nitrate near the entrance to the port, and this appears to be the same. It's the same compound that blew up in a warehouse on August the 4th, and it's just shocking to a lot of Lebanese that the government was not aware of how much of this chemical is stored in the city, and that the army, is only just now finding other stockpiles of it. Now, 4 tonnes is a much smaller amount. There was reportedly 2,700 metric tonnes stored in the warehouse that blew up, although the investigation has indicated that that amount might not have been, that's the amount that was put there in 2013, but it might not have been the amount that was left there. And there's big questions about where the other, the difference has gone, because there's militant groups operating in Lebanon that would have really wanted explosive material to manufacture weapons. And that's the big question mark at the moment about if there was less ammonium nitrate in that poorly secured warehouse, who took it and how much did they take? But yeah, people were quite shocked when the Lebanese army yesterday announced that it had found more ammonium nitrate. No one has any confidence that this very dangerous chemical that, for example, in Australia is stored in highly secured and regulated conditions is being kept with any safety in Lebanon at the moment.
Okay, Eric, we're going to keep in touch with you, hoping for developments from Beirut. Our Middle East correspondent, Eric Torchek, there live in Jerusalem. We are taking you now to Melbourne, where the CEO of the Richmond Tigers has been speaking following the suspension of 2 players for breaching COVID-19 protocols.
Firstly, look, we've worked really hard in recent years to build a really strong football club, both on and off the field. This year's been a challenging year. We've got some things wrong, certainly off the field, and we have to own those mistakes and take full responsibility for them, and we have. The most recent incident involving both Sydney and Callum is extremely disappointing for our football club, extremely disrespectful to the entire AFL community and the leadership, many of whom are here in this quarantine hub with me. It's very disrespectful to the Queensland government, whose generosity we're here. They've been wonderful hosts and accommodating us as a football club and largely the entire competition. And it's extremely disrespectful to our fans and our many members who want a club that they can be proud of. And I would assume there's many that aren't feeling particularly proud of our football club now. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to build a football club both on and off the football field that our members and fans can be proud of. Take some questions.
What was your reaction when the call came through this morning, almost disbelief?
Yeah, disbelief, anger, bewilderment, all those responses. You know, that the players knew the protocols. I mean, they've been drummed into the players consistently. There's been a number of, public high-profile examples that reinforce the standards that are expected, and that notwithstanding that, they would choose to act in breach of the protocols. I think it's probably fair to say, probably anger at, and probably deep embarrassment, to be honest. At the end of the day, we can't forget these are young men. Young people make mistakes. These are very, very serious mistakes. Put our club at risk, put the competition at risk, the health and safety of the Queensland people. They'll learn from it, but we need to put our arm around them, and we need to help them regain the trust and respect of our football club and the community.
Well, I know you mentioned there are challenges this year, everyone acknowledges that, but this obviously being a second COVID-19 breach, as well as some other, you might want to say, isolated behavioural incidents. How embarrassing is it that I'd be standing here today on the eve of a finals campaign where you're trying to defend a premiership? Yeah,
look, at the end of the day, I've spent 4 weeks with our team in the initial stages of the quarantine hub. We have a football club that has a very strong culture. We are a very focused and disciplined team on the field, and we have a very caring and connected culture off the field. So, I guess what we've seen over the course of this year certainly hasn't reflected that. I acknowledge that. We need to own that. They are a series of isolated incidents, but I understand the conclusions people will draw.
Are you worried that there's maybe a lack of leadership in the hub that you're down here and with their armies in Victoria?
No, not at all. No. I think our coach is doing an outstanding job coaching the team, but coaching the entire hub. I mean, I was there for 4 weeks myself. I was required to go home for 4 weeks to attend to other club matters. Tim Livingston is a very senior, experienced administrator. I think our leadership group, our leadership on field is very, very strong. And it really does personify that culture I'm talking about. So, these are incidents that are isolated, but I understand the conclusion that people are going to draw.
So is your brand being damaged now?
Oh, I think definitely. I think we've got to, we want to be respected as a football club. We want a club that our members and fans can be proud of, and there's no doubt about you've got a bit of work to do to sort of earn that sort of respect back.
What does a penalty mean for your football club, particularly financially?
Significantly painful. It's a significant penalty. It's a penalty that our players are responsible for. But there's other sort of penalties in terms of the inclusion of the soft cap. I mean, I've just had 4 weeks in Melbourne. We had to part company with staff who've lost their jobs through no fault of their own. Wonderful people. It's a really, really tough environment out there at the moment for everyone, and it's a really tough environment in the AFL community as well, particularly in terms of the financial challenges we are confronting and will continue to confront into the future.
So the potential for that fine soft cap to cost the staff members their job next year?
It's going to make things more challenging.
Brendan, did you or any other staff member at Richmond stay or read the ride out to Sydney or Callum?
They've been in isolation today, so no.
Really?
No, I haven't. No, there've been a series of interviews, for several hours today. I know, certainly Damien and the people there have, but I haven't had the opportunity to speak to them directly. They'll be leaving Queensland as soon as practical, so I haven't.
And that's where we'll leave the CEO of the Richmond Tigers, Brendan Gale, who labelled the actions of 2 of the team's players disrespectful. Sydney Stack and Callum Coleman-Jones were arrested by police early this morning after visiting a Gold Coast strip club and getting into a fight. Richmond, one of this year's premiership favourites, has been fined $100,000. That includes $25,000 from a previous breach. The AFL has suspended both players for 10 matches each and is sending them home from Queensland for breaching the league's COVID protocols. Now, it might be tricky to remember the feeling of rocking out at a live gig, but a national exhibition in Canberra is hoping to inspire nostalgia by showcasing the sights and sounds of pub rock.
Getting robbed, getting stoned, getting beat up, broken boned. This is the pub rock exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery of Australia in Canberra.
I tell you folks, it's harder than it looks. It's a long way to the top if you wanna rock and roll.
Nearly 200 pieces pay homage to rock, pop, sunburnt festivals and protests of decades past. There's a big focus on women of the scene who probably aren't traditionally thought of when pub rock comes to mind. But here we've got Susie Quattro, Little Patty, Olivia Newton-John, Kylie and the Divinals.
Well, Chrissy Amphlett would have to be one of the big ones from Divinals. I mean, I think everybody sort of fangirled her a little bit, and from my perspective, as a teenager in the 80s, if I could have been Chrissy, I would have been Chrissy.
It's pretty hard to see a big name act at a pub these days, even before COVID-19. But 100 people are allowed into this visual gig.
On the satellite, troughs and fronts are generating strong winds, showers and a few storms in Tasmania, southern South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. Moist onshore winds are bringing showers to Queensland's coast and far southwest WA. High pressure is keeping elsewhere dry and settled. Let's look at around the country for tomorrow now. In Queensland, mostly sunny, mild to warm temperatures in the east and cool to mild ones in the west. Late showers in New South Wales northeast, mostly sunny in the southeast and northwest, some fog in the southwest. Mostly sunny in Victoria's south and northwest and fog, then sunny with cool to cold temperatures in the northeast. In Tasmania, showers and cool temperatures in the south, clearing showers in the northwest and mostly cloudy conditions in the northeast. Clearing showers are expected in South Australia, mostly sunny in the centre and north, and some fog and cool to mild temperatures in the west. To WA, mostly sunny with cool to mild temperatures in the state's southwest, warm in the northwest and very warm in the northeast. And to the Territory, sunny and very warm in the top end, mild to warm in the Arnhem and sunny over the interior and in the south. Let's look now to Sunday's forecast for the capital cities. A shower or two for Brisbane, partly cloudy in Sydney, sunny in Melbourne, mostly sunny in Canberra, Adelaide and Hobart, showers for Perth and a sunny day in Darwin with a top of 35. Now, just finally from me, I'm going to take you back to live pictures of a rescue operation in Beirut for a possible survivor of last month's enormous blast. It is nearly 11 a.m. there, and just a short time ago, our Middle East correspondent Eric Torchek was describing how signs of life beneath the rubble have been detected, a weak heartbeat and breathing sounds. Rescuers believe someone is lying under the rubble, possibly in a coma. This is the rescuers, are believed to be within centimetres of reaching this person, believed to be a child. We will keep you up to date with developments from Beirut here on the ABC News channel throughout the evening. Of course, you can keep up to date with all of today's news at news.abc.net.au and on iView. More news here next. Enjoy your evening and your weekend. I'm Kirsten, Aiken.
We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come. We share a dream and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian. We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come. We share a dream and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian.
First, he smuggled out a book.
I wrote it in the phone and sent it text by text.
Then, a daring bid for freedom.
It was an audacious move for us to invite him.
This was a pretty extraordinary mission to get Buruz out, and the risks were enormous.
Buruz Buchani's great escape.
It was really stressful. I was not sure.
Can you imagine freedom?
The incredible Buruz Buchani.
Australian Story, Monday, ABC and iView.
Tuesdays, we're here to brighten up your night.
Of your love's like the warmth from the sun, and this will be our year to the long time to come.
We have to fight to save